I never thought I'd have to fight off a horde of entitled suburbanites from invading my ranch, but here we are. I've owned this land for over 15 years, a solid 50-acre spread with rolling pastures, a couple of barns, and a home I built myself. It's my piece of heaven, far away from city noise and ridiculous bureaucracy. Or at least, it was. Enter the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a nest of power-hungry busybodies from the fancy new subdivision a mile down the road. Their neighborhood was a cookie-cutter parade of beige houses, overly manicured lawns, and regulations stricter than a military boot camp. My ranch, however, was not part of their HOA. Never had been, never would be. Or so I thought. It started with a letter in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's official seal and signed by their president, Margaret Langley. Margaret was the kind of woman who clutched a clipboard like it was her firstborn and had a voice that could cut glass. I'd only met her once when she was welcoming me to her neighborhood, despite the fact that I lived here long before her precious HOA existed. The letter read, "Dear property owner, as part of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association's initiative to enhance community engagement and green spaces, your land has been designated as community recreation grounds for the enjoyment of all HOA members. This designation allows HOA residents to use your property for outdoor gatherings, walking trails, and recreational activities. Please ensure that any obstructions to access, such as gates or fencing, are removed by the end of the month to comply with this new policy. We look forward to your cooperation. Sincerely, Margaret Langley, President, Willow Creek HOA." I had to read it twice, then a third time. Surely, this was some kind of joke. A prank. Maybe a clerical error? Because there was no way these people actually thought they could waltz onto my land and declare it their playground. Determined to get to the bottom of this nonsense, I drove over to the HOA office, a small, fancy building near the subdivision entrance. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by a receptionist who looked like she had been personally trained by Margaret in the art of passive-aggressive hospitality. "I'd like to speak to Margaret Langley," I said, handing her the letter. Her eyes flicked over the paper before she gave me a fake smile. "Oh, you must be Mr. Carter. Mrs. Langley has been expecting you." Expecting me? I clenched my jaw. That wasn't a good sign. A few minutes later, I was in Margaret's office, sitting across from her as she folded her hands neatly on the desk. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she said, as if we were old friends. "I assume you're here about the land designation." "Damn right I am," I said. "You can't just claim my land as your community space." "I'm not in your HOA." Margaret let out a condescending little chuckle. "Oh, but you are affected by it. You see, under our new bylaws, properties within a certain radius of Willow Creek can be designated for community benefit if they meet specific land use criteria." I stared at her. That's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard. She sighed as if she were explaining something to a particularly slow child. "It's all perfectly legal. The HOA has worked closely with the county planning office to ensure compliance. We're simply making better use of the land." Better use. I repeated, "Lady, this is my ranch. My home. You can't just turn it into your personal park." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's not just for me. It's for all our residents. Imagine the joy families will have taking nature walks, hosting picnics." I cut her off. "Not happening. My land isn't for sale, it's not public, and it sure as hell isn't for HOA use." Margaret's smile thinned. "I would strongly advise you to reconsider, Mr. Carter. Resistance won't be beneficial for you." I leaned forward. "That sounds a lot like a threat." She simply smiled wider. "Just a suggestion." That's when I knew this wasn't over. Over the next week, things escalated. First, it was the trespassers. I woke up one morning to find a group of HOA members already on my property, walking their dogs, jogging, and even having a picnic under one of my oak trees. "Excuse me," I shouted, stomping toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" A middle-aged man in tennis shorts looked up from his sandwich. "Oh, we're just enjoying the new community space." I nearly choked. "This is private property. Get off my land." A woman in yoga pants frowned at me. Margaret said it was open to all HOA members. I saw red. Margaret does not own my land. Some of them had the decency to look sheepish and left, but a few lingered like I was the unreasonable one. That's when I knew I had to take stronger action. I put up no trespassing signs everywhere. That slowed them down for all of a day. The next morning, the signs were gone. Then, I locked my gates. That night, someone cut the locks. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding anymore. This was war. And if the HOA wanted to play dirty, I'd show them just how stubborn a rancher could be. The next morning, I was up before the sun, sipping my coffee on the porch when I saw something that damn near made me spit it out. A group of HOA members were laying out orange cones near my pasture. Two guys in reflective vests were hammering wooden stakes into my land, while a woman with a clipboard, probably another Margaret in training, was giving them instructions. I stormed down the steps. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The woman looked up, completely unfazed. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. We're just marking areas for future community trails and seating areas." I could feel a vein pulsing in my forehead. "This is private property. You have no right to be here." She sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mr. Carter, as we've explained, this land has been designated for community use under HOA bylaws." I stepped closer, towering over her. "I'm not in the HOA." Her smile didn't even flinch. "That's irrelevant." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. "If you don't get off my land in the next 30 seconds, I'll have the sheriff out here hauling you off for trespassing." She didn't look impressed, but she motioned for the workers to pack up. "You'll be hearing from us, Mr. Carter." I grinned, looking forward to it. As soon as they left, I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff's department. I had a good relationship with Sheriff Dawson, who'd been in this county longer than I had. When I explained what was happening, he let out a long sigh. "That damn HOA again," he muttered. "I've had complaints about them trying to push folks around. Don't worry, I'll make sure they get the message." An hour later, Dawson himself showed up at my gate. Dawson was an old-school lawman, boots, mustache, and the kind of presence that made people sit up straight. "So," he said, adjusting his hat, "Margaret Langley and her clipboard army think they can claim your land?" I handed him the HOA's letter. He read it, then snorted. "This is the biggest pile of legal nonsense I've ever seen. So they can't actually do this?" I asked. "Hell no," he said. "But that won't stop them from trying to bully you into giving up." I nodded. "Well, they're about to learn that I don't take kindly to bullies." Dawson chuckled. "Good. But just to make things official, I'll file a trespassing complaint. That way, if they come back, they won't just be annoying. You can have them arrested." He left, and I felt a little better. But my gut told me Margaret wasn't the type to back down after a warning. I was right. 2 days later, I came home to find a tow truck in my driveway, hooking up to my truck. What the hell? I ran toward it, heart pounding. The driver barely looked at me. "Orders from the Willow Creek HOA. Says this vehicle is illegally parked on community property." I damn near lost my mind. "This is my driveway on my land." He hesitated, clearly realizing something was off. You might want to take it up with the HOA." I was already dialing Margaret's number. The moment she picked up, I didn't even give her a chance to speak. "You sent a damn tow truck to steal my truck, Margaret?" Her voice was all fake sweetness. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I believe there was a misunderstanding. The HOA had complaints about abandoned vehicles. It's my truck on my property. If you don't cancel this tow right now, I'll have the sheriff on you so fast your clipboard will catch fire." She sighed, clearly disappointed her plan hadn't worked. "Fine, but you really should be more cooperative, Mr. Carter. This community is just trying to grow, and your attitude isn't helping." I hung up before I said something that would get me arrested. The tow truck driver unhooked my truck and drove off, looking relieved that he wasn't about to be caught in an all-out war. But I was done playing defense. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. That night, I got to work. First, I replaced all the no trespassing signs, this time with bigger, more aggressive warnings. Then, I took it up a notch. I had an old electric fence system stored in my barn. It hadn't been used in years, but with a little elbow grease and some fresh wiring, I got it working again. It wasn't lethal, just strong enough to give a good zap to anyone stupid enough to ignore my warnings. By the time the sun came up, my entire property was lined with electrified fencing. The HOA wouldn't know what hit them. By mid-morning, I was sitting on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, waiting for the inevitable. And I didn't have to wait long. From my vantage point, I saw 3 HOA members in matching pastel polos and khakis walking toward my property like they were about to lead a nature tour. Leading the pack? None other than Margaret Langley, armed with her ever-present clipboard. I set my coffee down and leaned back in my chair. This was about to get real interesting. It was a shocking development, literally. Margaret and her minions reached my fence line, which now had a fresh row of bright yellow warning signs that read, "Warning, electrified fence, do not touch." I watched as one of the HOA drones, a particularly smug-looking guy with sunglasses perched on his head, stepped forward. "This is unacceptable," Margaret declared, hands on her hips. Smug guy scoffed. "This is obviously fake. Carter's just trying to intimidate us." I almost felt bad for what was about to happen. Almost. Smug guy reached out and grabbed the metal wire with his bare hand. There was a loud pop, a sizzle, and a yelp that sounded like a chihuahua getting dunked in ice water. Smug guy stumbled backward, shaking his arm like it was possessed. What the hell?" Margaret's eyes went wide. "Oh my goodness. Are you all right?" "No, I'm not all right," he screeched, cradling his hand. "I just got electrocuted." I couldn't help myself. I let out a slow clap from the porch. Wow, who could have seen that coming? Maybe, I dunno, someone who can read. Margaret glared at me, nostrils flaring. "This is illegal, Mr. Carter." I stood up, stretching lazily. "Actually, no. This is perfectly legal. My land. My fence. My right to keep trespassers out." She huffed. "You cannot put an electrified fence around designated community land." "Community land?" I laughed. "I got news for you, Margaret. This land isn't designated for squat. Sheriff Dawson already confirmed you have zero authority here." She crossed her arms. "We'll see about that." I smiled. "Oh, we sure will." Sure enough, about an hour later, I saw a sheriff's department cruiser pull up. Sheriff Dawson himself stepped out, shaking his head like he already knew this was a waste of time. Margaret, of course, was standing by the fence, practically vibrating with righteous fury. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here," she said, putting on her best concerned citizen act. "Mr. Carter has installed a dangerous, illegal electric fence on community property." Dawson turned to look at me, raising an eyebrow. "That true, Carter?" I shrugged. "Got an electric fence up, yeah, but on my land. Not community property, because, as you told me the other day, that's not a real thing." Dawson sighed and turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, I've already explained to you that Mr. Carter's property is not under the HOA's jurisdiction." But, he shocked one of my members," she sputtered. Dawson scratched his chin. "Did this person ignore the warning signs and touch the fence?" Margaret hesitated. "Yes, but..." "Well," Dawson said, "then that's his fault. That's what fences are for, to keep people out." Margaret's face turned a delightful shade of red. "This is outrageous. Surely, there must be some legal action we can take." Dawson sighed. "You can take it up with a lawyer if you want, but I guarantee you it won't go anywhere. Now, unless you want to be the next one to test that fence, I suggest you and your folks stay off Mr. Carter's land." She clenched her fists like an angry toddler, but didn't argue. Not openly, anyway. But I knew Margaret wasn't done yet. And I was right. That night, I was working in my barn when I heard a strange noise, the unmistakable clunk of something heavy hitting the ground near my driveway. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside to see a fresh notice of violation sign planted right next to my fence. It read, "Notice, this property is in violation of Willow Creek HOA guidelines. All unauthorized fencing and obstructions must be removed within 48 hours or fines will be issued. Failure to comply may result in legal action and further penalties." I stared at the sign, then looked around. There, skulking away under the cover of darkness, was one of Margaret's minions, scurrying back toward the subdivision. I shook my head, tore the sign out of the ground, and threw it straight to the wood in the fire. "Nice try, Margaret," I muttered. It was clear that the HOA was getting desperate. They couldn't force me into their rules legally, so now they were trying to intimidate me with fake violations. Too bad for them. I don't scare easy. I wasn't just going to sit back and let the HOA keep pushing their luck. No, it was time to go on the offensive. So the next morning, I drove straight to the county records office. I wanted to see just how much dirt I could dig up on Margaret and her little HOA empire. And oh boy, I found something that was going to blow this whole thing wide open. Margaret had been playing dirty, but now it was my turn. By the time I left the county records office, I had enough ammo to bury Margaret Langley and her clipboard army. See, while digging through property records and HOA filings, I found a major problem with their so-called community land designation. It was completely bogus. The HOA had been illegally expanding their authority beyond their actual jurisdiction. They had no legal claim to my land or any other non-member properties. But that wasn't the real bombshell. Turns out, Margaret and her HOA weren't just overstepping boundaries. They were running a scam. According to county records, the HOA had been charging new homeowners extra special assessments under the promise that they were securing additional community amenities, one of which included a scenic nature reserve with trails and picnic areas. And guess where they had told people that land was? Yep, my ranch. Margaret had been selling the idea of my land as part of the HOA's future expansion plan, even though she had zero rights to it. That's why she was so desperate. She'd taken money from HOA members for something she couldn't legally provide. And if she didn't deliver, she'd have a whole neighborhood of angry homeowners demanding refunds. I had everything I needed. Now it was time to use it. I drove straight to the HOA's next public meeting, held at their fancy little clubhouse. Normally, these meetings were just for HOA members, but I wasn't exactly in the mood for following their rules. I walked in like I owned the place, dropped a fat stack of legal documents on the main table, and cleared my throat. Margaret, already seated at the front like a queen on her throne, frowned. "Mr. Carter, this meeting is for Willow Creek HOA members only." I cut her off. "You know what, Margaret? You're right. This is an HOA meeting. But since you seem to think my land belongs to the HOA, I figured that makes me a member, too." The room murmured. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "If you're here to cause trouble." "Oh, I'm way past causing trouble," I said, holding up the documents. "I'm here to expose what you've been up to." I turned to the crowd. "Did any of you pay extra HOA fees for a future community nature reserve?" A few hands went up. A woman near the front said, "Yes. Margaret told us there was going to be a park." "Yeah," I said, nodding. That park was supposed to be my private property, the one she tried to steal. The murmurs turned into outright shocked gasps and angry whispers. Margaret's face paled. "That's not true." "Oh, it absolutely is," I said, holding up a copy of the county records. "According to official documents, the HOA has no authority over my land. None. Zero. That means Margaret has been lying to you all and illegally collecting fees for a park that will never exist." The room exploded. People turned to Margaret, demanding answers. "Is this true? You said it was all official. Where's our money, Margaret?" Margaret tried to regain control. Now, let's not jump to conclusions." But I wasn't done. "You also might want to know," I said, raising my voice, "that falsely collecting HOA fees for non-existent amenities is fraud." Silence. Margaret's eye twitched. You can't prove that." I slapped down a final printed email exchange, one I had obtained from a friendly contact in the county planning office. It was a denial letter from the county, explicitly rejecting the HOA's attempt to extend their jurisdiction to my land. Dated 6 months ago, meaning Margaret knew all along that her scheme was illegal, but kept taking people's money anyway. And now, she was completely screwed. The meeting descended into chaos. People yelled at Margaret, demanding their money back. Others were already talking about lawsuits. One guy near the back said, "I work for a law firm. This is textbook HOA fraud. Margaret, you might want to get a lawyer." Margaret was visibly sweating. This is all just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding my ass," someone shouted. "We've been scammed." Then, as if things couldn't get worse for her, the county planning director himself stepped into the room. He had been CC'd on my records request and decided to attend the meeting personally. "Mrs. Langley," he said, "the county has received multiple complaints regarding your unauthorized HOA expansions. Expect a formal investigation into Willow Creek's financial practices. Margaret's face went sheet white. I smiled. Guess that community park isn't happening after all. The HOA meeting ended in absolute disaster. People stormed out, already talking about removing Margaret as president and filing legal complaints. And me? I walked out the door victorious. But I wasn't done just yet. The very next morning, I put up a massive new sign at the edge of my property. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. HOA members will be charged double. Just for fun. Margaret never bothered me again. But the HOA itself? Well, let's just say the legal battles that followed ripped it apart from the inside. By the time the dust settled, Margaret had been removed as president, multiple HOA board members resigned, and the entire organization faced a class action lawsuit from homeowners demanding their money back. As for my ranch, it stayed mine and mine alone. And now, thanks to my brand new security cameras, reinforced electric fencing, and a sheriff who was firmly on my side, not a single HOA member dared set foot on my land again. Margaret tried to steal my property. Instead, she lost everything. Thank you for listening to this story about Rancher and Hungry for Power HOA. Please share in the comments where you are from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.